English has just wandered in and is seated beside me. Nice to see you. Thanks for being here. Who's right? The Colmar Brunton poll, TVNZ, that had Labor ahead. The News Hub Reid Research poll that had the Nats well out in front last night, or RNZ's poll of polls that has National and Labor neck and neck. I want to talk about that in a sec, but can we start with Jian Yang? And these accusations contained in a newsroom story today. It's pretty sensational reading from the newsroom website. Essentially, Jian Yang studied at an elite Chinese spy school before moving to New Zealand. He has attracted the interest of our Security Intelligence Service, newsroom is saying. The agency he studied under or was with conducts spying activities for China. What has the SIS said to you about this?
Well, I don't comment on, as any Prime Minister does, on the operational security issues. But this is someone who's been open about his background in China. He's now a New Zealand citizen, has been for some time, served in our Parliament as a backbench MP, and appears to have served in a very appropriate manner, certainly built up the connections with the Chinese community, where I understand his background is well known there too.
Okay, so were significant details about where he studied and the people he was studying with withheld from the National Party as he was going through the process of becoming a candidate?
I'm advised not, that he was clear about his CV when he was approved as someone suitable to be a candidate. I became aware of it, probably some time back. He's been in Parliament since 2011.
When did you become aware of it?
Well, some time back. You get to know people.
Right. Who did you become aware of it from?
Well, I can't recall, to be honest. It's just that he had a military background, some connection with intelligence services.
Lots of people have military backgrounds, don't they? And
That's
in fact, I mean, there are lots of countries with compulsory military training, aren't there? So there are very many people in parts of the world who have a military background. I guess the interest here is what was his intelligence background. That's a different conversation, isn't it?
Well, and I understand he's been describing that. From my point of view, he has, and I think the point of view of the community he represents, functioned appropriately as a Member of Parliament, and there hasn't been a question about his loyalty to New Zealand as a New Zealand citizen.
Prime Ministers always say this when I ask them about intelligence briefings, that they can't comment, but you can tell me yes or no. Have you been briefed, yes or no, on him by the SIS?
Well, just don't comment. We never start on that stuff.
Yes or no. I promise that will be the final question I ask on whether or not you've been briefed by the SIS. Yes or no.
And I can promise you I'll give the same answer as every other Prime Minister's given.
I'm going to take that as a yes.
Well, I'm giving the same answer as every other Prime Minister's given.
Are you worried about this a week and a half out from the election?
Well, I think it's interesting that it surfaced as a set of assertions 10 days out from an election, when it's been well known for 5 or 6 years.
Well known. It's the first I've ever heard of it.
Well,
I'm the host of a formidable current affairs show on 5 nights a week. So first I've ever heard of this stuff, and I suspect lots of our listeners will be thinking, huh?
Well, I wouldn't expect people to be going through the CVs of MPs who've lived in other countries and come to New Zealand. I wouldn't expect they have, but it's something that he was clear about.
Okay. Lots of things popped up out of the woodwork today, including a new ad. National Party website has the ad on it if people want to watch this. You've done a bit of a dad joke with Let's Do This, which is a Labor Party campaign, and you've changed it to Let's Tax This. Gold. But in the attendant material, there's lots of pictures of people who seem to be on the face of it walking into a domestic house, and we're told that they're going to be paying capital gains tax or land tax. There's a guy who he seems to have a wallet in his back pocket, and we're told he's going to be paying more income tax. The accompanying publicity material that I have with me now says Labor wants to stall our economic success through heaping at least 7 new taxes on New Zealand. What are those 7 new taxes?
Well, the list that they've floated themselves, and these are all statements they've made themselves: a tourist tax, the petrol tax, regional petrol tax,
fuel tax,
comprehensive capital gains tax, inheritance tax, which apparently yesterday they ruled out.
So that's
higher income tax,
right?
Water tax.
Okay, inheritance tax.
These are all out of statements that Labor Party's made.
So the inheritance tax is gone, right?
Well, as of yesterday, apparently.
So can you? Well,
it's not clear just exactly what that means.
Right. We have to take Labor at their word, I guess, don't we? If they say
there's an overlap with capital gains tax. Like if your parents pass away and you didn't live in the house, but the house gets sold, as I came across a couple the other day dealing with this, very common experience. It's not just a handful of people. This is very common experience. The question is whether capital gains tax would apply to that house because they hadn't lived in it.
Right.
But that's that's one of the questions. There's many questions.
You said extra income tax.
Yeah. Well,
in the form of what?
Well, the Parliament, with the support of Greens and New Zealand First in July, legislated our family incomes package. So that includes a tax reduction of $1,000 a year for people on the average wage, plus bigger child payments, plus accommodation assistance. Now, Labor would need to legislate,
Bill,
because that will happen on the 1st of April.
Let's ring the show. I shouldn't call you Bill. I'm just incredulous that you were sitting opposite me. So this says heaping at least 7 new taxes on New Zealanders.
Yes.
We've already admitted there's only 6, that because inheritance seems to have gone, prima facie. And this isn't new, is it? It's not extra income tax. It's just that under Labor, their declared policy is that they won't get the tax cuts that they would get if people voted national, right?
Well, no, it's currently the law of the land. It's not a party policy. It's been voted for by the overwhelming majority of Parliament. It will happen on the 1st of April. That's when child poverty in New Zealand will drop by 50,000 kids, or 30%. That is the law of the land.
I'm going to ask the most disingenuous question I've ever asked. Do you have an honours degree in English literature?
I do.
Yes, I know. So, when you say new taxes, is that a new tax?
Yes, they will have to legislate to increase the rates of income tax, because the current rates of income tax on the books have just been lowered by the Parliament, applicable from the 1st of April. Okay. It's absolutely fair.
Yeah. Let's discuss.
I mean, the issue here is you're going into an election. All of the taxes we've listed have been floated by Labor, and they act as if it's not real, as if they don't understand that this is about people's livelihoods, the cash in their pockets, the value of their assets, their ability to get ahead. And we're just asking the questions New Zealanders are asking, and that is, well, if I vote for you, what will actually happen? And they're not able to say so.
And they're reasonable questions. And Jacinda Ardern is doing exactly the same thing that you're doing next Tuesday, and I will ask her those questions, and I look forward to her answering them. Let's look at your own track record on this. Key confirms GST increase being considered. This is February 22nd, 2010. Who was Minister of Finance at the time? That would have been you.
I was, yes.
Yeah, right. Let's go back to, this is the New Zealand Herald I'm reading from, 2008, you were elected. It was the first time Mr Key has confirmed the government is actively considering an increase in GST, a central recommendation of the tax working group set to find new ways to rebalance the system. John Key specifically excluded the possibility of a GST tax increase. You get into government, you have a tax working group, and then it's introduced. In other words, you are now demanding a kind of degree of rigour and high ground transparency from Labor that you simply didn't display yourself when you were in the same position.
Well, John, you're showing a surprising lack of understanding of the history. In 2008, just prior to the election, we had floated a tax package, which was income tax reductions. Then Lehman's collapsed, the world financial system essentially froze up. We cancelled those tax packages because clearly the government was going into deep recession.
There were quite major personal tax cuts in 2010, weren't there?
I'm just outlining the history, because the analogy you're drawing is simply wrong. 2008.
I wasn't drawing an analogy, I was just simply stating fact.
No, you were.
No, I wasn't. I was stating fact. John Key said in 2008 there will be no GST increase.
You have to understand the circumstances. We were in a collapse of the financial system, government guarantees on the banks. I remember this, I sat through it. And then we were looking at how to get out of what was then a deep recession. And then in September 2011 we had which was after that, we had the big earthquake, so it was fortunate we'd done something. So in 2010, we set about saying, how are we going to get this economy out of the mire it's in and the government's very large and increasing deficits? And we made the tax mix change. Very transparent process. And when we got to 2011...
Completely contrary. Can I get the agreement on this statement of fact, completely contrary to what John Key had promised in 2008, that there would be no GST increase?
Well, the circumstances were completely different. We had a global financial crisis and a country in deep recession, and we needed to get the economy up and moving. And so what we did was a neutral package, distributionally neutral, fiscally neutral. We increased GST and offset it with a decrease in income tax, so people weren't worse off. And then they had the opportunity in the upcoming election to give the verdict on that.
Okay. Let's talk about what's going on with Labor here. I've been thinking about Stephen Joyce's $11.7 billion, and we can read through the list of people who've said, look, that hole doesn't exist. It doesn't exist to that extent. Some people like Cameron Baggery are saying, look, Labor are going to find that they're going to be pretty stretched. No one other than you and Stephen Joyce is saying $11.7 billion. But what he did was throw the cat amongst the pigeons, right? Were you getting feedback from your polling company, run by David Farrer, that Labor had an Achilles heel around numbers? And did you play to that in a kind of dark arts kind of way? Never mind the truth, let's do the damage. Was that a campaign strategy?
No, and that's a myth. When you go into election campaigns, other parties have to answer all the questions we have to answer every single day. And that is, how do you pay for what you said you would do? And Stephen Joyce's estimate is still the best estimate of what that gap is. I've looked at more budgets than any commentator.
Who else supports him? Who else supports?
Well, I do, and I've looked at more budgets than any commentator. They look at it in an economic sense. If the accountants look at it, you can see what's happened with the Labor numbers and the effect. So what he always said was, it's either that big gap or Labor are going to run budgets for 2 or 3 years where there is no more money for anything other than health and education. Now, that is simply implausible. You can't do that.
There's not an $11.7 billion hole there, is there?
That's still the best estimate. You can argue about it, but the alternative is that Labor are going to run budgets where for 2 or 3 years there's no money for anything outside health and education. So nothing for vulnerable children, nothing for conservation, nothing for police, justice,
Jacinda
defence.
Ardern is going to join us next Tuesday, so I'm going to ask her where she's going to find all that money, and they are very important conversations for her to answer. I want to talk about some of your figures. Tax on water tax. You were at a meeting in Ashburton, 400 farmers, I think, there, right? Mm-hmm. You were very well received indeed, and you're playing this very hard. Feels a little bit like 81, you know, the Nats are working the sort of provincial electorates, Labor are working the urban electorates very, very hard, and there is a sense of a kind of us against them, developing farmers against urban people, but that's a different conversation. You came out with the figure of somebody who would have to pay $50,000 a year in water tax, right?
Look, I can't recall exactly the details of that. Some of the irrigators might, but the main point I was making is it's just a dumb idea if you're trying to achieve environmental outcomes. And part of the divisiveness of this thing is that the Labor Party and others have turned up the Greens as if they have suddenly discovered there's a water quality issue in our rivers. Those communities, which I've represented, and the government have been working intensively for 5, 6, 7 years on this stuff, developing the national measurement system, creating the collaborative processes.
Are you telling me you're proud of the management of freshwater in New Zealand under your government?
Yeah, because we've got on with the job. We've created...
Really?
Yes.
You think Nick Smith's done a good job? You think the government's done all it can to protect our waterways, our rivers, our lakes and our fresh water?
Okay, well, I'll just give you an example. There was no agreed science on measuring water quality. We have been through an intensive collaborative process through the Land and Water Forum and also with regional councils to develop that, and it is now settled. We now have a system for measuring E. coli, nitrates and phosphorus across the country, and now we can monitor progress. Now, you might think that's easy. It was actually very difficult to get the science. It certainly took
into your third term to do it, right?
Well, because we had to start with the iwi conversations. We had to assemble the Land and Water Forum, which started actually quite early on. And the other thing that irritates that crowd in Ashburton is they've spent years at meetings developing the processes for changing farm management, dealing with the nutrient allocations, intensive, difficult work. And then these people who have shown no understanding or empathy for that work turn up and say, if you are going to quarrel with us over the water tax, we'll double it. The water tax misses most of the target.
Okay, let's talk about the figures. I just want to get some rigour around the figures. So $50,000 a year is the sort of top level of what a farmer might have to pay, right?
Yep.
Now, that is equivalent. Anusha Bradley did a fascinating report for Morning Report this morning. Agricultural economist Peter Fraser, former Treasury economist, I don't know if you work with him, he calculated that as the same amount of water as would be used by 31,250 people in their homes. Is anyone really saying farmers shouldn't have to pay a small amount for the use of that water?
Look, the core argument here is that the tax is an indiscriminate way of raising revenue which is then going to go off to a bunch of bureaucrats who will distribute it. If you're seriously interested in raising the quality of water in our waterways, that is not the instrument you use.
What do you do?
You do what's going on now, and you would do well to go and see the work that's happening in the Waikato, in the Manawatu, in Canterbury, in Southland, to deal with these issues. Millions are being invested by our rural communities, and you know what one day, John? One day it's going to come to town, because E. coli levels are twice as high in urban waterways as they are in rural areas, and that is going to be a much bigger task to fix.
That's a very hard task to fix, but it's also hard to sheep blame, isn't it? I mean, no one's letting animals wander around in great numbers shit in urban areas, are they? I mean, when my dog, bless him, when little Cosmo does a poo, I pick it up in a plastic bag when I take him for a walk through Greyland Park, right? So I don't know that they're the same conversations, are they?
Well, they are. The water quality is the water quality, and this isn't about blame. This is about working with the people who actually make the decisions. Because you know who makes the decisions about what happens in the Ashburton River, or the Oriti River, or the Manawatu River? It's the farm worker opening the gate at 5 o'clock in the morning. It's the farmer's family who've owned that place for a long time. It's the people in the small towns who are trying to deal with the wastewater that comes out of the small town into the river. We work with them. And the water tax is a blunt, indiscriminate instrument which doesn't address those problems, and has been pushed at them as a punitive tax, not as a way of punishing them for what they do, rather than working with them on the very real progress we're making.
We've got 7 minutes left, and it's a bummer. Time flies when you're having fun. I wish we had more time. But do you enjoy this as you're sitting here opposite me campaigning? You went into Parliament in 1990. 1990. Do you think, oh God, I can't be buggered with this? Or actually, does it still really matter to you?
Well, what does it sound like? It really matters, because you've raised the water issue about water. We have the opportunity in New Zealand to get the smart solution, which is to keep remaining the producer of high quality food for the world,
forgive me. After 9 years, can you still sell that as a future tense prospect?
Absolutely, because this is a long-term job. You know, politics doesn't. The issues aren't in 3-year cycles. Changing the quality of our water, even all the other political parties, actually are all saying roughly 20 to 30 years. Some call it a generation. Some call it 20 or 30 years. It's like pest-free New Zealand. That's 30 years, but we're getting on with it. And I am highly motivated about these things, because that's a key strategic issue for New Zealand.
Can we address butter? It's not a key strategic issue for New Zealand, but it is a very expensive household item now. It's at record high prices. In other words, actually at the front end, at the revenue end, the market rules, right? Sorry, we've run out of water. Can we get some more water delivered into the studio? Is that all right? Sorry for Mr. English. We should have had a jug or something.
That's right. I get through a lot of water.
It's a very poor. We can't afford it. Joke. Dad joke. So at the market end, right, we are not spared the consequences. At the revenue end, we pay what butter costs. Mm-hmm. Are farmers unworldly to keep insisting that they are spared the costs of water at the production end?
Well, they're not spared the costs of water. I mean, right? If you take down in Canterbury, or was yesterday, that what they're doing is trying to shift from aquifer water, which is draining the aquifers and creating intensity of nitrates, particularly in the shallow levels of the soil, and swapping over to storing alpine winter water. So when it's plenty of it, you store it and then you use it. That is a much more sophisticated approach than what I'm hearing in the political debate. I mean, these people are spending millions doing it now.
Jacinda Ardern's grandfather turned away from, actually discharged from Waikato Hospital. Thank you very much. This is at 11:30 at night. Thank you.
I think we just need to check, because I'm still unsure whether he was actually discharged or not.
Okay.
I can only go on them. Well, the public reports don't have him discharged.
Can we talk about social indicators like youth suicide, which is just terrible, isn't it? And imprisonment. And I know you're too decent a man to deny this. You're not proud of our prison population. You're not proud of our youth suicide rate. You're not proud of our prison population. There is somewhere in this country now a sense of something having been lost amongst some people, and that is hope. Hope of participation, hope of something decent in life, hope of a crime-free life, hope of home ownership, hope of getting by, hope of holidays. What do you say to those people?
Well, everyone has aspirations, and they all have their dreams for how they can be and how their life can be. And our job is to enable the best opportunity for that to occur. And in each of the cases that you've mentioned, those opportunities are growing. And there's many you haven't mentioned where they have grown. Like, say, tomorrow morning, 50,000 fewer children will wake up in a benefit-dependent household than 6 years ago. The number of kids who are going through our youth courts you could only describe as plummeted. It's dropped by 50 or 60%. I went out to Vanguard School today, a partnership school, which apparently a Labor government would close if they became the government. 150, 200 kids there, full of hope and aspiration because they've been given an alternative.
I heard about
so
them.
We're always looking for the way that we can enable that. And actually, we've got the toolkit now through social investment to get right into if it's particular groups of offenders, particular groups of young people vulnerable to suicide, to be able to deliver the support where it will make a difference.
Because I went out to a school in South Auckland last week, right, which was Finlayson Park Primary School in Manurewa, under the formidable management of Shirley Mahi. It's New Zealand's largest primary school. Can we end on this tonight? Because we've only got 2 and a bit minutes left. She told me about kids who have cups of tea for dinner. She told me about the fact that accommodation costs so much that working parents are struggling to feed their children. What is the message of hope from you as National Party leader for those families if you are re-elected?
That on the 1st of April, which I know might seem a wee way away right now, those families who are most pressed by high rents and low income will be anything 60, 80 through to $150 a week better off, because we recognise an underlying problem, a pretty basic, I know it sounds boring detail, but accommodation supplement in West and South Auckland hasn't been adjusted since 2006. Now we're doing it, we're adjusting it, and that's going to be a big shift. That is the primary driver of reducing the number of kids under the international poverty line by 50%. Then we have the opportunity on the back of a growing economy to do it again in another 2 or 3 years. That's the kind of success we could have over the next few years if we keep the economy moving and stay on track.
How many people in poverty, how many children living in poverty do you think? What's the number? So the Child Poverty Monitor, right, they use 2 figures. One is material hardship, which is I think at about 155,000 children. One is income hardship, which is about 295,000. What's the figure you use?
Well, there's a whole lot of measures. We publish a book full of measures every year.
How many?
The one I'm referring to is just one out of the measures.
Yeah.
The OECD number of households below 50% of the median income.
Yeah.
There's around 150,000 of those kids.
Yeah.
They'll drop by 50,000 on the 1st of April. That's on the books now, and then we get to go further in the next few years. Alongside that, we also have to address the other aspects of deprivation and poverty, and that's what social investment's all about.
Bill English, thank you for coming in. I'm sorry about the water situation. We really appreciate your time in the studio this evening. Bill English, leader of the National Party.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Jacinda Ardern will be doing the same thing next Tuesday, and I will ask her some of the questions that you were raising about what they can afford. Bill English joining us live in the Checkpoint studio here in Auckland with insufficient water.